A 19-year-old tried to rob a church in South Memphis during the early morning hours. When he was fleeing with the sacred objects, a female voice called his name in the darkness, but there was no one else in the church besides him. The Tuesday morning heat in South Memphis was already oppressive at 2:47 a.m., with the kind of humid air that made breathing feel like work. The streets of the neighborhood slept under the sweltering Tennessee summer that refused to break, when Marcus Williams, 19 years old, parked his stolen motorcycle 2 blocks from St. Mary's Catholic Church. Marcus wasn't the kind of kid parents dream of having. Tall and thin at 6 feet 1 inch, with poorly done tattoos covering his arms and eyes that mixed rage with desperation, he'd already accumulated more arrests than years of life. Son of a single mother working 2 jobs to support 3 kids in a rundown apartment, Marcus had dropped out of school at 14 to help at home, which in practice meant joining the local drug trade. "That boy's got a good heart," his mother, Dorothy Williams, always said to anyone who'd listen. "He just got mixed up with the wrong crowd out of necessity." But necessity had turned into addiction, addiction into violence, and violence into a downward spiral that seemed to have no end. Marcus had already stolen phones, wallets, bikes, and even cars. But he'd never robbed a church. The idea came from Rico, one of the local drug dealers, during a conversation at the corner 3 days earlier. "Man, that church over on Riverside has all kinds of valuable stuff," Rico said, lighting up a joint. "Silver candlesticks, saint statues worth money, that kind of thing. And nobody's there at night." Marcus had laughed at the time. "Rob a church, Rico? That's heavy, man." "What's heavy is staying broke, kid. God, if he exists, knows we gotta survive." At the time, Marcus pretended the idea didn't interest him. But 3 days later, when he woke up Tuesday morning without $1 in his pocket, no food at home, and owing money to Rico himself, the church started looking like a viable solution. St. Mary's Catholic Church was a simple 2-story brick building, built in the 1980s by the local community. It wasn't large or luxurious. On the contrary, it was the kind of church that served a working-class population, simple people who put their faith in every penny of the tithe basket. But Marcus wasn't thinking about anyone's faith when he turned off the motorcycle and walked through the deserted streets toward the temple. He was thinking about the $500 Rico had promised for the sacred objects, enough money to pay off his debt and still have something left over. The plan was simple: jump the low back fence, break into the sacristy door, which he knew was weaker than the main entrance, grab the silver candlesticks from the altar, some statues that looked valuable, and get out before anyone noticed. Marcus had studied the church's routine for 3 days. He knew the priest, an elderly man named Father Thompson, lived in a small house next to the temple but slept heavily because of his blood pressure medication. He knew there was no alarm system, the community couldn't afford it. And he knew Tuesday was the quietest day of the week in the neighborhood. At 3:10 a.m., Marcus jumped the low back fence of the church with the agility of someone who'd spent his entire adolescence running from police. His fake Jordans hit the cement floor of the small backyard without making a sound. The sacristy door was indeed fragile. 2 pries with a crowbar Marcus carried in his backpack, and the lock gave way with a muffled crack. "Easy," he muttered, pushing the door and entering the darkness. The church interior was plunged in almost total darkness, broken only by the reddish light of some votive candles burning before the side altar dedicated to Our Lady of Guadalupe. Marcus turned on his phone's flashlight on the weakest setting and began to orient himself. The sacristy was small and organized, cabinets with liturgical vestments, some smaller images, registration books. Nothing worth taking. What he wanted was at the main altar. Marcus opened the door connecting the sacristy to the altar and entered the sacred space. The church nave stretched before him, with its 2 rows of worn wooden pews and the elevated altar at the end. That's when he saw exactly what he was looking for. On the main altar, 2 silver candlesticks gleamed even in the dim available light. To the right side, a statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe about 2 feet tall, with a golden crown that appeared to be genuine metal. At the side altar, a crucified Christ that, even from a distance, Marcus could see had gold details. "Jackpot," he whispered, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Marcus approached the main altar and picked up the first candlestick. It was heavy, definitely real silver. The second candlestick went into his backpack along with the first. When he turned to the statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe, Marcus hesitated for a moment. There was something about the sculpted face of the saint that made him feel uncomfortable, as if she were looking directly at him. "It's just a statue," he muttered to himself, extending his hands to take it. The moment his fingers touched the base of the statue, Marcus felt something strange, a kind of tingling that went up his arms. For a second, he thought it was an electric shock, but there were no electrical wires nearby. Ignoring the strange sensation, Marcus lifted the statue carefully. It was heavier than expected, and the crown really seemed to be gold. "Sorry there, Our Lady," he muttered ironically, putting the statue in his backpack. "But here's the thing, Rico needs this money." Marcus was heading to the side altar to get the crucifix when he heard it. "Marcus." The sound of his own name echoing in the empty church made him stop instantly. His heart raced, and he looked around searching for the source of the voice. There was no one there. "Who's there?" he whispered, his voice trembling more than he'd like to admit. Silence. Marcus stood still for almost a minute, all his senses on maximum alert. It must have been his imagination. Or maybe someone passing on the street. Or the wind. But there was no wind. Deciding he was imagining things, Marcus continued toward the crucifix. When he was extending his hand to take it, the voice came again. "Marcus, my son." This time there was no doubt. It was a female voice, soft but firm, and it came from somewhere inside the church itself. Marcus dropped his hand and turned quickly, pointing his phone's flashlight to every corner. "Nothing." "Who are you?" he asked, his voice now clearly nervous. "What do you want? Why are you doing this?" The question came loaded with such deep sadness that Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. It wasn't accusation, it was genuine curiosity mixed with pain. "Doing what?" Marcus responded defensively, though he knew exactly what the voice meant. "Hurting people who trust in me." "I'm not hurting anybody," Marcus muttered, but the words sounded weak, even to himself. "This statue you carry was bought with money from Mrs. Garcia, who works 12 hours a day cleaning offices to pay rent and still gives tithe. The candlesticks were donated by Mr. Johnson, who sold his deceased wife's wedding ring to have something to offer to God." Each word was like a stab to Marcus's chest. How did this voice know these things? And why did he feel like crying? I need the money," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "My mom's struggling. I owe the dealer. If I don't pay." "And you think hurting other children of mine will solve your problems?" The question came loaded with a compassion Marcus had never experienced before. It wasn't judgment, it was genuine concern. "Who are you?" Marcus asked again, this time with less aggressiveness and more confusion. "I am the one you carry in your backpack. I am the mother you never had the right to have. I am the one who cries with your mother when she found out you were involved in crime." Marcus felt his legs weaken. "This isn't happening. I'm crazy. I must have smoked something bad." "You're not crazy, Marcus. You're lost." The voice now seemed to come from everywhere at once. From the walls, the ceiling, the very air around him. "Why did you stop studying? The question caught Marcus by surprise. What? You were a good student. Your fourth-grade teacher, Mrs. Davis, always said you had a special talent for math. Why did you stop? How did she know that? Marcus hadn't talked about school in years. Because it didn't make sense, he answered automatically. School doesn't matter for people born poor. Or because you got scared of trying and failing. The observation hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach. No one had ever verbalized that before, but she had hit right on the wound he'd carried for 5 years. That's none of your business, he muttered. Everything about you is my business, my son. I saw when you cried alone in the school bathroom after the boys laughed at your torn clothes. I felt your pain when you found out you didn't have money for the field trip all your friends were going on. I was there when you decided it was easier to be the bad boy than the poor boy. Tears began rolling down Marcus's face without him realizing it. How did she know all this? How did she know the most painful parts of his story? Why are you telling me this? He asked, his voice choked. Because I want you to know you were never alone. Because I want you to understand that your choices don't define who you are. They only define where you are right now. And where am I right now? You're in the place where all my children arrive when they get lost, the place where there are only 2 paths. One leads to more darkness, more pain, more loneliness. The other leads home. Home. Marcus laughed bitterly. I don't have a home. I live in a rundown apartment with my mom and my siblings. Home isn't a place, Marcus. Home is where you're loved unconditionally. Home is where you're accepted exactly as you are, but also where you're challenged to become everything you can be. Marcus was silent for several minutes, processing the words. The presence in the church seemed to wait patiently for his response. And if I choose the path home? He finally asked. If I try to change? How do I know it won't go wrong again? You don't know. Change always involves risk. But I promise you won't walk alone. You promise. Marcus laughed without humor. You're a voice in my head. For all I know, I'm having a psychotic break. Then test me. How? Leave everything here. The candlesticks, my statue, your robbery plans. Leave this church now and go home. Tomorrow, if you still think you imagined this conversation, you can come back and finish what you started. And if I leave now? If I leave things here? What happens to me? How will I pay my debt to Rico? One thing at a time, my son. First, choose the path. Then, we'll figure out together how to walk it. Marcus looked at the backpack in his hands, heavy with the stolen objects. He looked at the crucifix he still hadn't taken. He looked at the altar where he'd started that night, planning to commit a crime, and where he was now having the strangest and most important conversation of his life. If I leave these things here, he said slowly, will you be with me when I leave this church? I've always been with you, Marcus. You just didn't know how to look. With trembling hands, Marcus opened his backpack and took out the silver candlesticks, carefully placing them back on the altar. When it came time to take out the statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe, he hesitated. Can I look at you before putting you back? Of course, my son. Marcus took the statue from his backpack and held it at eye level, illuminating it with his phone's flashlight. The sculpted face of the saint seemed different now, softer, more welcoming, more maternal. You're beautiful, he said simply. And then, impossible as it seemed, Marcus swore he saw the statue smile. With almost reverential care, he placed Our Lady of Guadalupe back in her place on the altar. Now what? He asked. Now you go home. And tomorrow, you come back here. Not to steal, but to talk to Father Thompson. About what? About starting over. Marcus stood there for a few more minutes, looking at the altar that minutes before he'd planned to ransack, and that now seemed to radiate a peace he couldn't explain. "Our Lady," he called softly. "Yes. Thanks for not calling the police." The laughter that echoed through the church was soft and full of love. "I don't call the police, Marcus. I call lost hearts back home." Marcus put the crowbar back in his backpack, turned off his phone's flashlight, and walked toward the exit. At the door, he turned one last time. "See you tomorrow," he whispered to the darkness. "See you tomorrow, my son." When Marcus jumped the church fence 5 minutes later, he was no longer the same young man who'd entered there. He didn't know yet what this meant or what would happen next, but one thing he knew for certain. For the first time in 5 years, he wasn't alone. The stolen motorcycle took him back home, but during the entire journey, Marcus had the strange sensation he was being accompanied, not pursued, but protected. When he arrived at his apartment in South Memphis, it was almost 4:30 a.m. His mother slept on the living room couch, as she always did when he went out at night, waiting to hear the motorcycle noise that meant her son had come home safe. Marcus stopped at the door of the small room and looked at Dorothy Williams sleeping. For the first time in years, he really saw his mother. Not just the woman who scolded him or asked him to get a job, but the woman who worked 12 hours a day, who saved every penny, who lit candles to saints asking for the safety of a son who seemed determined to destroy himself. "Tomorrow will be different," he murmured to her, even knowing she couldn't hear him. "I promise." And for the first time in a long time, Marcus Williams slept in peace. Marcus woke up Wednesday at 10:30 a.m. with a strange sensation that he'd dreamed something very important, but couldn't remember exactly what. It was only when he got up from bed and saw the crowbar fallen on the floor next to his backpack that everything came back like a flood. The church. The voice. Our Lady of Guadalupe. For a moment, Marcus stood looking at the tool he'd used to break into the sacristy door, trying to decide if what had happened in the early morning was real, or if it had been just a very vivid dream. But the sense of peace that still lingered in his chest didn't seem like dream material. "Marcus." His mother's voice came from the kitchen. "Come have breakfast. It's almost lunchtime." Dorothy Williams was standing in front of the stove, stirring an egg in the pan, when Marcus appeared in the small kitchen doorway. She looked at her son with an expression that mixed relief and concern. "What time did you get in last night?" she asked without turning around. "Almost 5 in the morning," Marcus answered honestly, surprising both himself and his mother with the sincerity. "What were you doing until that hour?" Marcus hesitated. How could he explain that he'd tried to rob a church but had been stopped by a conversation with Our Lady of Guadalupe? "Thinking about life," he said finally. Dorothy turned to look at her son. There was something different in his tone of voice, something she couldn't identify. "Thinking about what in life?" "About changing." The word came out with more conviction than Marcus expected. Dorothy put down the spoon on the counter and turned completely to face him. "Changing how?" "I don't know yet. But changing." They stared at each other for a long moment. Dorothy had heard promises of change from her son before, usually after he was arrested or after some ugly street fight. But there was something in Marcus's eyes that morning that was different. "What happened last night, Marcus?" I don't know how to explain it, Mom. But I think Our Lady spoke to me." Dorothy Williams was a devout Catholic woman. She'd worked her entire life as a hotel housekeeper, raised 3 children alone after her husband was killed in a robbery, and never lost faith despite all the difficulties. But when she heard her son talk about Our Lady, her first reaction was skepticism. "What do you mean spoke to you?" "Mom, I know it sounds crazy, But... Marcus, Dorothy interrupted, her voice getting more serious. Were you using something last night? Some drug that made you hallucinate? No, Mom. I swear I wasn't. I was doing something wrong, and she appeared and made me stop. What wrong thing? Marcus took a deep breath. If he was going to start changing, he had to start with the truth. I was going to rob St. Mary's Church. The silence that followed was deafening. Dorothy stood still looking at her son as if she wasn't sure she'd heard right. You were going to what? Rob the church. The candlesticks, the statues. Rico had told me they were worth money, and I needed to pay a debt. Marcus Williams. Dorothy's voice came out as a scream. Have you completely lost your mind? I know, Mom. I know it was wrong. That's why I'm trying to explain. I went into the church, took the things, but when I was about to leave, she spoke to me. Who spoke to you? Our Lady. The statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe. She knew things about me that nobody knows. About school, about when I was little, about you. Dorothy sat heavily in one of the 2 chairs in the small kitchen. Her hands trembled slightly. And what did she say? That I had to choose between continuing on the path I was on or coming home. And that if I chose to come home, she would help me. And what did you choose? I chose to come home. I left everything at the church and came away. Dorothy was silent for several minutes, studying her son's face. Marcus had never lied to her about really important things. His crimes, yes, but never about issues that touched her faith. And now? She finally asked. Now she said for me to go talk to Father Thompson. About starting over. You really want to change, Marcus? The question came loaded with all the years of suffering Dorothy had endured watching her son sink into crime. All the sleepless nights waiting for him to come home. All the visits to the police station. All the tears shed in prayers asking for her boy's soul. I want to, Mom. For the first time in a long time, I really want to. Dorothy stood up slowly and approached her son. She placed her hands on his shoulders and looked into his eyes. Then we're going to talk to Father Thompson. Together. You'll come with me? Son, I spent 5 years praying for Our Lady to bring you back. If she really spoke to you last night, I'm not going to let you face this alone. At 2 p.m., mother and son were walking down Riverside Street toward St. Mary's Catholic Church. Marcus felt a knot in his stomach, not from fear, but from anxiety. What if the priest didn't believe him? What if he thought it was all lies to escape some trouble? St. Mary's Catholic Church looked different in daylight. What in the early morning had been a dark and imposing building was now just a simple and welcoming construction, with its white and blue walls faded by the Memphis sun. Father Thompson was watering the plants in the small side garden when he saw them approaching. He was a man of about 70, short and round, with white hair and a smile that seemed permanently installed on his face. Mrs. Williams, he called, waving with his free hand. Good to see you. And this must be Marcus, right? Marcus was surprised. How did the priest know his name? Good afternoon, Father Thompson, Dorothy replied. I brought my son to talk to you. He has something important to say. The priest set aside the watering can and approached. There was something in his eyes, a serenity, a wisdom, that made Marcus feel immediately calmer. Of course. Shall we go to my office? The priest's office was small and simple, with a wooden desk, some chairs, and walls covered with photos of the community. Marcus sat next to his mother, still not knowing exactly how to begin. So, my son, said Father Thompson, Your mother said you have something important to tell me. Marcus took a deep breath. Father, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I tried to rob your church last night. Father Thompson didn't seem shocked. In fact, he just nodded as if he already knew. I figured, he said calmly. What do you mean, you figured? Because when I came to open the church this morning, I found the sacristy door broken, but nothing was missing. And there were sneaker prints on the altar, but everything was in place. Marcus swallowed hard. You didn't call the police? No. Because whoever entered here didn't take anything. That meant one of two things. Either the person was interrupted by someone, or something happened that made them change their mind. It was the second option, Marcus said quietly. And what happened? Marcus told everything. From planning the robbery to the conversation with Our Lady of Guadalupe. Father Thompson listened without interrupting, asking only a few questions to clarify details. When Marcus finished, the priest was silent for a few minutes, as if processing the story. Marcus, he said finally, do you believe Our Lady really spoke to you? I think so. I can't explain it any other way. And you want to change your life? I do. But I don't know how. I owe money to the dealer, I don't have a job, I didn't even finish high school. One thing at a time, said the priest, echoing the words Marcus had heard in the early morning. First, let's solve the debt issue. How? How much do you owe? $500. Father Thompson got up and went to a desk drawer. He took out a small box and counted $500 bills. Take it, he said, extending the money to Marcus. Pay off your debt. Marcus looked at the bills as if they were poisonous snakes. Father, I can't accept this. I was going to rob your church. Exactly why you can accept it. Our Lady prevented the robbery not to protect me, but to save you. Letting you sink further because of a debt would be wasting the miracle she performed. But how will I pay you back? By working here at the church. We need someone to do maintenance, take care of the garden, help with community activities. The work doesn't pay much, but it's honest. Marcus felt his eyes fill with tears. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to start over. Dorothy, who had been silent during the entire conversation, finally spoke. Father, are you sure? My son has done many wrong things. Mrs. Williams, if Our Lady gave him a second chance, who am I not to give one to? Marcus took the money with trembling hands. Father, I swear I'll work hard to deserve this chance. You already deserve it, my son. Our Lady doesn't choose perfect people, she chooses people who need love. That afternoon, Marcus went to the corner where Rico usually hung out and paid off his debt. The expression of surprise on the dealer's face when he saw the money was almost comical. Where'd you get all this money, kid? Working, Marcus answered simply. Working where? You don't work. Now I do. At the church. Rico burst out laughing. At the church? What church would want an ex-con working there? A church that believes in second chances. You're crazy, Marcus. Church doesn't even pay enough to eat. At least I'll sleep peacefully. Marcus turned to leave, but Rico grabbed his arm. Look, if you changed your mind about that job we talked about, that's fine. But don't come with this holy roller act now. You know when you need us, we're here. I know. But I won't need you anymore. In the days that followed, Marcus's transformation surprised even Dorothy. He woke up early, had breakfast with the family, went to church, and spent the day taking care of the garden, painting walls, organizing the parish library. Father Thompson had enrolled him in night school to finish high school. But the most noticeable change happened during Masses. On the first Sunday after the conversation with Our Lady, Marcus had gone to the 7 p.m. Mass, accompanied by his mother. When communion time came, he stayed seated. He didn't feel worthy to receive the Eucharist. That's when he heard, once again, that familiar voice. "Come, my son." Marcus looked around. No one else seemed to have heard anything. "I don't deserve it," he murmured quietly. "Nobody deserves it. That's why it's grace." Marcus got up slowly and joined the communion line. When his turn came, Father Thompson looked into his eyes and whispered, "Body of Christ." "Amen," Marcus replied, and for the first time in his life, he really understood what that meant. 3 months later, Marcus Williams was a completely different person. He had finished high school and night school with excellent grades, gotten an official work card as a parish employee, and started a landscaping technical course at the community college. But the deepest transformation wasn't external. It was internal. Marcus had discovered something he never knew existed: purpose. Not just the purpose of having a job or finishing school, but the purpose of making a difference in other people's lives. He started giving math tutoring to community children, remembering Our Lady's words about his talent for numbers. Then he began visiting young prisoners at the local jail, telling his story and offering hope. "The difference between you and me," he would tell the boys behind bars, "is that I found someone who believes in me. But she believes in you too." 1 year after the attempted robbery, Marcus was at the altar of St. Mary's Church, not as a thief, but as a groom. He had met Jessica, a community teacher, during one of the parish's social projects. She had fallen in love not with the man he was, but with the man he was becoming. "Marcus Williams," said Father Thompson during the ceremony, "do you take Jessica as your wife? Do you promise to love and respect her in joy and sorrow, in sickness and health, until death do you part?" "I do," Marcus replied, looking at the statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe at the side altar. For a moment, he swore he saw her smile again. During the reception, Dorothy approached her son. "My boy," she said, with tears in her eyes, "I knew you would find your way." "Mom, I didn't find the way. The way found me." "What do you mean?" "Our Lady never stopped looking for me. Even when I was in the worst place in my life, she was there. I just didn't know how to look." Today, 5 years after that March early morning, Marcus Williams is coordinator of social projects at Our Lady of Peace Parish. He and Jessica have 2 children, Mary Dorothy, 3 years old, and Anthony Marcus, 1 year old. Every night, before sleeping, Marcus goes to the church altar and spends a few minutes in prayer before the statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe. "Thank you," he always whispers, "for not giving up on me." And every night, in the silence of the empty church, Marcus is certain she responds, "I never give up on my children, Marcus. Never." On the wall of his office at the parish, Marcus keeps a photo of that early morning. Not of him stealing, obviously, but of the sacristy door he had broken and that was now repaired. Below the photo, a plaque that says, "The place where my life changed forever." Because sometimes, the greatest miracle isn't Our Lady appearing in visions or performing impossible healings. Sometimes, the greatest miracle is her whispering in the ear of a lost boy, "You can choose a different path." And sometimes, that's all a lost soul needs to hear to find the way back home. And there you have it. This incredible story of transformation touched your heart, didn't it? Marcus proved that when Our Lady wants to reach a lost soul, she'll go wherever necessary. Even to a dark church in the middle of a robbery attempt, right? If you were moved by this real testimony of how a 19-year-old tried to rob a church in Memphis but Our Lady spoke to him and completely changed his life forever, hit that like button below. It really helps me continue sharing these stories that show it's never too late for a second chance. If you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now and hit that notification bell. Every week there's a new testimony that will renew your faith that Our Lady never gives up on any of her children, no matter how lost they may be. And don't forget to check out our store in the first pinned comment. We have amazing Christian products, including the 365-day devotional, perfect for those who want to strengthen their faith and give God a second chance to work in their lives. Tell us in the comments, have you ever been at rock bottom and felt God speak to you? Do you believe Our Lady protects even those in the criminal world? And if you also believe in her transforming power, write, Our Lady never gives up. Declare your faith in maternal mercy. Share this video with young people on the wrong path, with families who have lost children, with anyone who needs to know that Our Lady is always ready to give a second chance. Thanks for watching until the end. May Our Lady bless your life and never let you forget that she's always ready to bring you back home. See you in the next testimony.